Ba-da-da-bum-bum, addy-addy-yeah-yeah. Ba-da-da-bum-bum, ba-da-da-bum-bum, addy-addy-yeah-yeah.
Man, what causes you to be weary as a pastor fighting for racial reconciliation?
Everything. No, no. A few things, man. The work of just being a pastor in this fight. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say weary in the sense where I'm wanting to run away from the work, but weary in the sense that it just takes a lot of energy. Is understanding your congregation, understanding where each and every person in your congregation is. The purpose of a pastor is to be a shepherd, is to be so one, making sure that I am setting the example in my life, which is another reason why I decided to join this conversation, which is to, in a sense, encourage those in my congregation who may be tuning in, and encourage those who may know me as a pastor to lend your voice to this conversation. But not only that, um, but just really getting down into the lives, understand that in my congregation, there are people that don't think systemic racism is real. And how do I still pastor people like that? How
Mm.
do I still shepherd them? How do I still love them? How do I still show them grace? And how do I still deliver truth to them in a way that is not intended to hurt them, but deliver truth to them in a way that's intended to mature them and grow them? To be a pastor and to see down the road of where they could be, but they're not there right yet, right now. And how do I help walk alongside them to get to that point? Understanding the fact that what if I have a member in my congregation who never chooses to, believe in the reality of systemic racism? How do I still continue to pastor them? How do I pastor a member who wants to see past my identity, who wants to see past my blackness as a pastor? And our church is actually doing really well in that it has been a long time. I'm gonna be honest, it's been about a 10-year or more struggle with our congregation and having these conversations. Probably back when 2012, I think, when Trayvon popped off.
Mhm.
Back in 2012, we started beginning to have these conversations. Some people left our church, some people came to our church, and honestly, the encouraging thing is that we are seeing a lot of the fruits of just that faithfulness and that consistency and that consistent, like, you know what, you disagree with me, but I'm going to continue to love you. And over the last 10 years, just now, like I had a brother when Trayvon, happened. I mean, he was completely pro George Zimmerman and everything. And
Oh,
he shared we almost had to do some church discipline conversations. But it was a conversation. I seen him recently begin sharing information about Black Wall Street, sharing information about redlining, and I was like, that was just very encouraging to see him enter into those conversations from a different way. And so the weary thing of just kind of to wrap it up is just the weary thing of being a pastor is just being faithful to the office of being a shepherd, being patient, um, wanting to shepherd the hearts of people,
Mhm.
understanding if someone says something that I may disagree with, or that may appear as being anti-black, to lean into them, understanding their family of origin, understanding how are they raised, understanding how do they see the world, understanding what is your worldview, what is your perspective, and tearing down and reshaping worldviews. That's a serious work. That's not going to happen overnight. That's not going to
Yeah.
happen on a Facebook post. So that
Mhm.
means me opening up my home,
Yeah.
having people come in and sit down at my table and having these hard conversations. That means me going over to their house and
Mhm.
sitting down and having those hard
Yeah.
conversations. That means me, in the midst of all of that, still loving on their family and being present.
Mhm.
People have to understand we are not going to solve all of this off of Twitter, 140 characters, and we're not going to solve all of this off of Facebook status. I'm not saying those things are wrong and that you're doing
Yeah.
anything wrong, but you have to get into the lives of people. You have to see their worldview. You have to see how they think. You have to see how they understand. Why does the term white privilege make them uncomfortable, right? Rather than just shouting at them, understand, like, how do you think? How were you shaped as a child into this adult so that you can have this perspective and worldview, and then slowly and faithfully begin just throwing those rocks, right?
Yeah.
Just presenting small alternative perspectives over the course of time. So
Mm-hmm.
just the work of just being a pastor, period,
Yeah,
is just weary.
I think what you said, man, as far as leaning in and inviting people to your home, man, that goes a long way. I have a neighbor. I've been living in this neighborhood for 3 years. We see each other. We wave. We're cordial. You follow me on Facebook, no big deal. But then when they start to talk about George Floyd, he said something, and instead of like, you know what, let me go in on him, because I typically stay away from social justice stuff on social media, because like I'd rather just have a conversation with you face to face, and I just simply say, hey man, let's talk about this face to face. And I'm so glad I did that, because now we text often about random stuff now. He invited me to his home. Hey man, I'm making Rotel, come over. These type of things, and we begin to have a dialogue, and I just listen. Because at this point, I go, you've offered yourself. You told me what you felt. I'm not going to be aggressive. I don't know what you've encountered before you even came to me, and vice versa. So let me listen and help grow at the same time. Go ahead, Chantel.
No, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, and I'm this is probably why I'm not a pastor.
I could tell I was sitting.
Man, y'all, like I get so frustrated at the whole piecemealing. And I'm not. This is not a knock against what you do, Brent, or
No, that's fine. Yeah, you good.
or Caleb or TJ, or anyone. I mean, because again, in fighting this thing, all sides have to be present. But God, dog, like I literally am living in Psalm 73 a whole lot. And I get the grace and space to do that, where I'm like, they getting by like fat rats. They can say what they want to say. They, as in oppressive white people who are engaging in active racism. You get to say what you want to say, how you say it, be rude, shove stuff down my face. I have to assimilate to and deal with. And yet when it is time for the awakening or whatever, we gotta like piecemeal it, or we gotta, and some stuff I do think when you're talking about generational things, and when you're talking about an entire history, and how some people can really short circuit when you really understand that the American history you've been taught is not American history. You will, I mean, you short circuit, but there are some things, y'all, within the church that are just flat out wrong, inappropriate, unbiblical, and should be met with some force. And I'm talking like in your face. And if you got a problem with it, you know?
Yeah.
Because we deal with everything else that way. Let somebody jump up and be gay. Oh God, you better not. You better not. Let somebody deal with that. Let somebody have an abortion. You got your picket and you ready to roll.
Yeah.
But when it comes to these particular things, it's slow walked. And it's more conversation, and you gotta, when there's some things that are just A and B, 1 + 1 is 2.
Yeah.
This is wrong. So that makes me want to just.
Yeah, no, I get you. I think, and I totally agree with you. I think it's always a case by case, because I can't slap everybody, right? Because definitely I'll be in jail. And that's the other thing. Like, Lord knows I can't go to protests, because I'm going to see something wrong, and the way that I'm naturally built, I'm going to intervene. I can't help it. I got a whole family to protect. And in that, I think it does need to be. That's why we're having these conversations, and that's why we got to jump in and lean in and go, look, this is not some cute, cuddly thing that I'm so sorry. Like, no, like we have to address the issues and deal with the hard matters. But Alex, you good, bro? Your internet good?
Hope so.
All right.
We'll see. Can y'all hear me?
He froze again, but yeah, we can hear
you. Okay. So your question was privilege, right?
Yeah. How about just turn your camera off and just talk? How about that?
You look at my dog. Can you hear me better?
Yep, that's good. Go ahead.
Okay. Look at my dog. There's my sweet dog, Lola. Okay. White privilege. So I have to be very candid with you all to say that I'm someone that has struggled with the natural reaction that you hear a lot today. So when the first time I was told about white privilege, I had the exact same reaction of defensiveness. I was offended because I thought it was negating my testimony. I thought it was negating my work ethic. And I had a good friend stop me and say, I get your story. I get your work ethic. I get where you are today. Tell me what in your life has been a trial or a tribulation or something you've had to face because of the color of your skin. And that's a sobering question. And I want all of any white individual listening, I want you to think about that question. What in your life, where have you been negatively treated? Or when has the color of your skin ever been a thing, ever been acknowledged? And if you're anything like me, the reality is the answer was it's never been an issue. So when I hear the stories, so Dwayne, when you asked the question earlier, I think on the question you sent, you're like, fellas, tell me about how you feel about being profiled and stopped by a cop. And I go, yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. Because that's the privilege, right? The reality is the stories that I continually hear from my Black brothers and sisters, I have no idea what it's like because I've never experienced it.
Yeah.
And so when you look at, I've never been followed in a store. I've never had to think about having a conversation with my child about the color of their skin.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had to worry. The police have never had to worry about being profiled and stopped and saying you look like you fit the bill of someone else. I've never had to worry about that. So that's the reality of white privilege, right? Is that we've not had this system and the history of oppression, and we don't have to face that today. And so to your question is, how do you combat it? How do we fight it? I want to highlight what everyone else has said is you have to do the work. Because even once you understand what white privilege means, it doesn't mean it goes away. Every day you have to face your white privilege. Every day I have to check myself about what's ingrained in me because I can't trust it because that's my flesh and that's of sin. So every day I have to check where my privilege is. Every day I have to check where my prejudice is because the reality is I'm steeped in it. And if I pretend to think that I haven't figured out, I've missed the boat. Austin Channing Brown was on a podcast with Brene Brown the other day, and she had this quote that she said, you have to be.
Shout out a Black woman. Sorry, I'm just.
You good, Megan? You good, girl?
I love it. But she said, I'm here to get it right, not to be right. So if we're ever in this position where we're thinking we have it perfected, you're wrong. I'm going to say you have a blind spot. And you always have to be here to get it right. And so we have to do the work. And that's why I love the term of anti-racism, because again, Austin and Channing Brown said the work of anti-racism is about becoming a better human for other humans. So tell me about fragility. Why are we uncomfortable as white people in the church, as believers, uncomfortable saying, how do we better ourselves for other brothers and sisters? And y'all, I struggle with that. But I can't struggle with that because I was that. I was that person that didn't get it. So what I would encourage y'all is it's important to walk this journey. It's important to understand this. It's important to check yourself. And the biggest thing I would tell folks is it's important to stay in the game. Because the reality is for white people, we can check out at any moment. I can disengage from this conversation later tonight and go hang out with white friends and be completely fine. That's my reality. And so how do we continue to challenge ourselves? Because it's hard to be in the spaces because we're facing the realities of the flesh, of our sin. We're facing the realities of our history. And so until we continue to sit in this, it's like living with a low-grade fever of sadness when you're talking about this, because the reality is you have to continue to fight it. Because as soon as we check out, we're continually putting the burden on the people of color, and particularly our Black brothers and sisters, to do the work, and we have to do the work with them.
Alex, I really appreciate what you just said, because you talked about the work and the experiences that we have based on what we bring to the table, right? And like shout out to our friends and the people that we do community with that'll call us out on that. because early on in my career, I thought I was a bilingual student. I didn't speak English, growing up, and then I only spoke English. And so I like brought that battle of like, here's like the Hispanic community, all the things, without realizing that I wasn't using my voice for all students and Black students in the area that I was serving. Like I was so diligent about making sure that we were serving our Hispanic students. And I had a great friend that called me up and was like, yo, like, you're coming off like this and you don't realize it because you're so passionate and you're so strong about this group. What about our Black kids? And I was like, wow, you're right.
That's good. The other thing, if I can add just real quick, we saw an example with Amy Cooper where she weaponized the white privilege, right? I think we have to think about how do we use, for us white people, how do we use it for good? And so for me, I think I have amazing colleagues that call me out on my shit, which is so great and needed. And oftentimes they'll say, well, just to the earlier comment, I think Stephanie, Ma, and Amaya were talking about is it will come better from you as a white male. And so to me, I'm like, oh, that's weird. Why do I need to? But the reality is, then fine. If it does, then fine. Then let me use it. And let me see also how I can bring other voices into the room and how I can advocate for others if people are overlooked. And so I've been often someone a bit more hesitant to step into positions of power because I don't care about the corporate ladder. I don't care about the status, but to me, I go, but if that's an opportunity that I can have in order to have an eye for others and be an advocate for folks that have been consistently overlooked and unheard, then if that is God's will, then let me step into that.
But there's humility in the fact that you don't just open your mouth because you're asked, because you're a white male, because then you jump into, and we joke about the Giglio deal, but and I don't know if that was his reasoning for the flub, but I do think there are times where that white men, and men in particular, I've had these conversations where they feel like, well, what's the solution? And we got to fix this thing. And the heart is in the right place in the sense of wanting to lend, but the dismissiveness of well, what are we going to do about it? Or end up and even trying to sit in power and just start speaking on things that you really haven't done the research and or had the conversations to. It's a humbling deal to be able to say, no, I'm not the best to speak on this, and or it's a humbling thing to go, I'm gonna go take some time and do the reading. When my friends asked me what, can they do now when they were getting into this situation of being, awakened, I said, resist the urge to try to go fix it tomorrow. Go and read. Go have the uncomfortable conversation. And I think because you have done that, Alex, and you continue to do that, I think that's when people like you and other allies that you speak up. Some people, we don't need you to speak up. We need you to shut up and go and go. And that's just period. But there's a level of pride in that, which again is like, why is the church struggling so doggone bad? We got a whole Holy Spirit. Why are we struggling? Why the white men in the church such buttholes? Like, you got a whole Jesus, and we out here looking crazy. Crazy.
But to that point, can I tell you and tell folks that are believers that are struggling with this, what are you praying about? Truly, what are you praying about? Are you praying for the Holy Spirit to change your heart? Are you willing to go before your King and say, Lord, convict me of things? Because the reality is, I think we don't want to because it's uncomfortable, but we need to. That's where it has to start out. So that's our commonality as the church, as believers, is we all have the same God. So go to him. Ask for him to look into your heart and convict, because I can't do it for you.
Amen.
Because your God is your country.
That too. Man, look, hey, so y'all, it's about to be 9. Let's try to wrap this up in 30 minutes. Good luck with that. We said 30 minutes ago. Look, look, Megan already said we're gonna have to do part 15. There you go. So, hey, it is what it is. And so, Stephanie Mott, I know we had a conversation when I originally called you about this, without getting too deep into it, but deep enough. Man, why is racial reconciliation inside the church so important for you as far as where you choose to fellowship at?
So I think we have to go back to what Megan had addressed first, and that was my first point that I put, that reconciliation is the restoration of friendly relations. And we can't really put racial reconciliation when there hasn't been friendly relations throughout the history of our church and our country. So we're going to start with racial conciliation. So God cares about this. Someone has already referenced the Revelation 7 church, where it says, I looked, and before me was a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne. So God cares about every detail of who we are, who our people are, our language, what we bring to the table, who makes up what makes up our identity. And so as the body, we need to care about those things too. And so to go to the point of, I don't see color, which I've heard so many times in white church, and it's like, but God does. So we need to also, and He was creative enough to build us with color, create us with color and culture and language. So we need to see and recognize those things. The second part is that if we just look at Genesis 1:27, that we were created in His image, the Imago Dei. And so when we think about the racial construct in America and how we identify race as a social construct, it's very much a power construct. And so the Lord definitely speaks to that. We see references to that reconciliation throughout Ephesians, the book of Ephesians. It says, for He Himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. His purpose was to create in Himself one new humanity out of the two, and that in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, but which He put to death through their hostility. And then 2 Corinthians 5:18, God who has reconciled us to Himself through Christ and give ministry of reconciliation. So there's this reconciliation vertically to the Lord, but there's also reconciliation horizontally to one another. And so I am passionate about this because of what I've seen some of my friends walk through as they've, my Black friends that have walked through as they've been a part of the white body, and the way they've been treated, and that reconciliation has not been there because the conciliation had not even been there. They were very much whitewashed. They were very much, their identity of who they were was taken away. And so how can you live out the Imago Dei without seeing the humanness and seeing every detail of people? And then how can we live out the other scriptures that were references in Ephesians and in Corinthians of being reconciled? And then the last note that is just one of my favorites is Jesus flipped a table over this issue. And I have a little table in my office that sometimes I flip when I'm frustrated. I call it the table flipping ministry. So He was serious and He was passionate about about caring well for people, and seeing people and seeing their issues, and speaking into that space and demanding justice and demanding right doing by one another. So I've tried to make that as short and concise as possible. I've flown through all of my notes because we're trying to stick to 30 minutes in additional to the 30 minutes you just extended. So someone else can feel free to hop on and kind of add more, but I have seen firsthand some of my Black friends who have been scarred from the white church. And I've also seen some of my students and the members of my community where I worked and I actually lived, who they left the faith, they left the church. Their voices were not heard. They had been very damaged. Someone had referenced that the church has some repentance to do in how we have abused biblical scripture and perpetuating white supremacy, and that conversation has not been had. And so I've seen many people leaving the faith and seeking alternative either empowerment or seeking alternative belief systems because it fulfills a void of what they're missing, that the church is just not even touching and not even speaking to. So there's a lot of conversations that can be had in that, but for me it is passionate because These are our brothers and sisters that God has called us to love and to care for well. And so when you see it firsthand, it's hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I add a little side comment, Dwayne?
Yeah, go ahead, because I'm about to ask you a question next.
Okay. So we are about to watch a wave happen within white evangelicalism. And the wave is this. It is going to be super cool to be about racial reconciliation. And I've been thinking a little bit about this lately. I am fearful. I'm fearful for all of the people of color who may get hurt by this. And here is what I want to say to all of my friends who are leaders in predominantly white evangelical churches. There is a difference between having an appearance of diversity and actually doing the sacrificial hard work to be a diverse people. There's a difference. There is a difference between having an appearance of diversity and doing the hard work and sacrifice and denying oneself, taking up a cross, dying to yourself to be a diverse people. And we cannot be a people who do an appearance work. That was the work of the Pharisees.
Yeah.
That was the work of the Pharisees. Whitewash empty tombs. And here's the thing. I just want to graciously to all my white pastor friends, if you are not willing to pay the cost.
That's what I was about to say, TJ.
It
costs something.
It costs something, Dwayne. It costs a lot. So if you are not willing to pay the cost, to be uncomfortable, to make people angry, to do all those things, to you know what? There's a difference between inviting people of color to your table and giving up part of that table to people of color.
Yeah.
You better Reddit it. You better Reddit it.
Pay the cost. Don't do it. I don't want to get hurt at your church. Do not do it. So, Jesus commands us. You better check the cost before you start. So please do your homework before you step into the wave of making racial reconciliation cool.
Man, look.
Man.
So,
I want to say, TJ, too. I just want to back, man, when we started doing this work at my old church, the first event that we had was interesting. White people, I just say they weren't necessarily ready, I guess. And pastor had a choice. Do you pull back? It will cost you. Do you pull back? Do you say, man, I'm gonna blow my church up? What am I doing? Mm-hmm. Or do you say, no, this is the gospel.
Yeah.
This is what we're
some
called.
Money.
And people gonna leave.
You're gonna lose some
people
money.
left. You're gonna lose members. People gonna call you all kinds of names. Your email box gonna be all blown up.
You're gonna lose some money.
Right. Should tell the truth. You're gonna lose some tithes and some offerings.
Tithes and offerings.
But
you're gonna lose that. No, you're gonna lose that bank backing. That's what.
But it matters that you stay the course. For me, what was so healing for me was that he said, we will press forward. And if they go, they can go, because this is the gospel. This is the work of Christ. It is important, to TJ's point, that you not start something. And then when it gets costly, you pull back and you don't have a full commitment to follow it through, because that is more hurtful to people of color and to Black people for you to do that. And when people start to leave and they're like, oh, well, you need to check your heart. Evangelicals speak. No, you check your heart.
Yeah.
You check your heart. Don't tell me to check my heart. You check your heart, because why is it that when you are no longer centered, you can't stay?
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have to run away from what's difficult. So anyways, y'all run that back. All the white pastors, when Dwayne posts this, you run back TJ's speech and you just play that for a while and sit with that and ruminate before you decide what you're going to do.
And I think the other part that I just wanted to add to TJ's is you never arrive. Like it's a constantly evolving, it's going to be costly. So my one friend that I've referenced, she was a part of a very large church and been very vocal about racial reconciliation. It's one of their 4 pillars of the church. And there have been books, and the pastor has gone on speaking sprees and all of these things. However, when it came time to listen to her story, listen to her pain, the authenticity of living it out was not there. And so you can be on the pulpit and on a platform all day long, but if you're not going back and revisiting that conversation, like you don't arrive at this point of like, okay, we're good. No, it's a constant, you have to go back, you have to reevaluate, you have to listen to the stories, you have to listen to the pain, and you have to go back and hear those things and reconcile. Someone says, asks like, so what does a church do to reconcile? And I think to TJ's point, as it's constantly going to cost you. And so that's not just to pastors, that's to white folks in general, that you constantly have to go back and reevaluate, but definitely those positions of power and those positions that have been vocal about it, you're not done.
Because I think the other thing is too, is when we choose to worship at a predominantly white church, we're already giving up so much. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot that we're paying the cost for that. I got to constantly think, man, who am I invite to come to church with me? Like, can they palate this? Like, man, I don't know. And those are things that I constantly have to think about. Then I got to also think about, where am I going to serve? Because I don't want to be the token guy. I don't want to be the guy at the front holding the door saying, hey, welcome to our church. Because then what happens? I'm reminded of my ancestors who had to hold the door open for so long. That's not a good look for y'all. And so those are things that we constantly got to think through. TJ, I do want to come back to you because I know we had a conversation. And I think it's important for people to understand this part as well. Because you said something earlier about being the accepted minority. But here lately, you are discovering what it means to be an Asian American man. What does that process look like for you, at least?
For most of my life, I didn't want to be an Asian dude. I wanted to be a white dude, because I grew up in the Woodlands. If any of y'all know what the Woodlands is, when I moved there, I was in 4th grade, and you could count on 1 or 2 hands the number of people of color at my K through 6 school. And I just wanted to be like my friends. And I think at that moment in 4th grade, all the way through my early 20s, and I'm 26 now, so it hasn't been that long. It has been a deep source of shame for me. The fact that I am a Japanese and Chinese man. And it has been something to wrestle through and to process, because when I talk about it being a source of shame, every time I was rejected, every time I felt like I failed at something, every time that came up, I would always justify that story through the tagline of, well, it's because I'm Asian. And so here, being a minority in the midst of a majority culture, you are different. I was explaining it to somebody the other day. It's like, I don't know if you guys watched The Office. I watched The Office, and there was an episode where, oh my gosh, Steve Carell. What's his character's name? Oh my gosh.
I don't watch The Office.
Michael
Michael Scott.
Brings his girlfriend to a Diwali party. It's this like Indian party, and he tells his girlfriend that it's a costume party, and she shows up in a cheerleader outfit. And I told somebody the other day, being a minority in the midst of a predominantly white community is like being in that cheerleading outfit and you can't take it off. And it has been something, because I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to know if I was enough. Back to white supremacy, I wanted to know if what I had was enough to be loved, enough to be safe, enough to be human. And the shift really happened for me when I began to see my Japanese and Chinese self attached to something far bigger than myself. I began to see it attached to a family, to a lineage, to a heritage, to a history and a culture, where I could walk through and see and weave through. I could see God's faithfulness all the way through. And it rooted me in something much deeper than in our individualistic culture. Like, it rooted me so deeply into the fact of, we've made it this far, and God's faithfulness has taken us this far. And I can see that through the fact that I have Japanese and Chinese blood. And I began to be proud of that. And I began to be proud that my ethnicity and my ethnic identity will last all the way through eternity.
Yeah.
And that began to be something I was proud of, that God is being glorified and he will bring this into full glorification one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
And so right now, I don't have to be a white guy.
Yeah.
I get to be a proud Japanese and Chinese man.
Amen. That's dope, bro. Chantel, you probably remember this. If any of y'all have ever been to CCDA, for those who don't know what CCDA is, it's Cultural Community Development Association. And one of my favorite things about being there, I was having this conversation last night with an elder when we was talking about worship, is that when they would worship on stage, every nationality was represented. And as every nationality is represented, everybody sung in their native tongue. And I don't know a lot of language. Like, look, we singing in African dialect, and I have no clue what we're singing, but you can feel the presence of the Lord being there. And I imagine that's what the end looks like when we get to heaven. But unfortunately, we don't like to do that in our churches. We cool with Hillsong and Elevation, and Israel may get a pass. It depends.
Nah, he left his wife. They ain't fooling with him no more.
Well, he out. And so, but at the end of the day, man, I think you gotta celebrate the thing that's inside your church. We live in Houston, and if you live in another city, I don't know what it's like there, but for me specifically, man, what does a church in Houston look like? It's diverse. I don't understand why it's so hard to understand that it needs to look that way. And you got to fight for that. You can't be in a family space and you don't attract those people. What'd you say, Chantel?
No, I just thinking about what TJ said and that part that you just said, that, even what we're doing right now and choosing to engage in any of this, it's exhausting. It's not cookie cutter. It's not, when you say out loud, you want to, do the hard work, to push for diversity in your church, and not just in the kind of like, here's a sprinkle or here's a token, whatever. Man, I get tired just even thinking about that for any leadership team, any pastor, whatever. But it's exhausting on both sides. We're not playing the oppression Olympics here. Like, it's difficult. It's difficult. And, you just start. You start little by little, and you do it. And you got to think through your set list. And you got to process through, and companies do it all the time. Well, Snapchat doesn't, but somebody has to be around to say, let's process this. And it's exhausting, but it should be valuable when you're talking about human beings experiencing the kingdom. And and you have other, again, I go back to this, because we looking crazy as believers right now. Oh, I ain't looking crazy. They looking crazy. But other entities are doing this. You got inclusion clauses. You got people thinking through and processing. And we over here throwing a song on the playlist. So we, having the one Black, one Asian, one staff, and you just, but,
Good deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, Chantel, you just got me thinking about something. Thinking about the space that you're in, and what are our barriers to being inclusive? Like, what are some of the things that maybe you've seen or experienced just in the work and the space that you're in right now?
You repeat that one more time. What are the barriers?
What are the barriers to inclusion?
Part of it is, and so the only work I've ever done as a believer has been in nonprofit. And I think part of the barriers, you have a lot of these nonprofits that are in the hood or in inner cities. They're run by white males, or the board is predominantly white. Even coming from my camp years at Kids Across America, the majority of the board was white. And then, but then their separate board for the Kaleos was diverse, it was Black or whatever. And so I think that part is a barrier, because those are people that are speaking into particular things, especially when it comes to your executive director. And then I think, to be flat out honest too, I think a barrier is right now, a lot of Black folks don't want to do this work with a board member, with an executive director that's white. If I had known what I knew before jumping into this, I probably wouldn't have done, I wouldn't have started off doing what I did. Does that make sense? So, and in this particular work, because you have to be so adjacent to something that you're probably one generation out of, which is the poverty and things like that, it's just rough. That's just me in this sector of vocational ministry. It is exhausting for me right now to be an African-American woman and be involved in community development, and then who also did incarnational living for a minute. And so you just kind of like, and so, but the main barrier is a lot of the leadership roles are occupied by white men.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing to that too, Danny?
Yeah.
If we're actually going to do work, right, there needs to be safe spaces where people of color can point out where an organization promotes white privilege and where an organization is held in captivity by white supremacy. There there needs to be places where we can articulate that, and where we know that something is going to be put into motion to fight actively against that.
Good.
That work needs to be that framework needs to be in place.
TJ, you are saying a lot, and I don't think most people are ready to deal with that. Because most people walk in fear when it comes to that. Because it's the fear of what am I going to lose if I allow that to happen, right?
Can I just share one more resource?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's Breaking Down Walls, a model for reconciliation in age of racial strife. And so these are the two. It's not as well known. It's very much in regards to ministry in Chicago. And so the white guy, I can't remember his name. I can't remember. Anyhow, he runs like a nonprofit and like group of lawyers and that kind of thing. And then the Black man was a pastor, and he had a Black church in the same neighborhood. And so they partnered together. And so it goes to their story of failure the first time, and then their story of what they learned, and the story of rebuilding. So if there are any pastors who are trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this, TJ? How do we take that conversation to the next level? I would highly encourage you to read this because it does create those safe spaces. And it talks about how it's hard, and they're very honest, and they failed the first time. And so they had to go back and redo it. So again, Breaking Down Walls, it's a good book.
This is why you're an ally, Mike, because you be reading.
Look, this girl at every topic. This book right here. I'm like, come on, Mike. Break out that library you got over there. So look, Dan, I want to ask you a question. With you raising a teenage son who is tall, what conversations and at what age did you have to start talking to Ethan about racism?
Yeah. So I have a 15-year-old, and like Dwayne said, he's tall. I'm 5'10". He's probably 6'1". If he's probably taller, I'm just not admitting it. But so we started talking about it since we started talking about race in a way of celebrating like his characteristics pretty early on. But we started talking about race in a way of the way the world's going to see you when he was in elementary school. When he was in second grade, he was on the playground with some of his friends. He went to a primarily white school, and he was on the playground with one of his friends, and they were saying things that 8-year-old boys say. And Ethan said, "Yo, if you say that, I'm going to blow you up." Well, a teacher heard that. He got sent to the principal's office. He was borderline, like almost not suspended, the one that's above suspension.
Expelled?
What?
Expelled?
Expelled. He was almost expelled from school for that statement. Because they saw what I still saw as this sweet little kid. They saw him as this person who was making a threat. He wasn't, he plays video games, he watched movies, right? Like there's no context for that. And another boy, white boy, said it too, but there wasn't the same consequence. And so it was the first, I think I thought that I would start having those conversations with him when he was older, about what to do when you get stopped, which we have those conversations. I didn't realize that we were going to have to start having those conversations in elementary school, and being prepared for the way, if you question a teacher, how they might interpret that as being disrespectful because of the color of your skin. And so having those conversations at that age, having the conversations about, he knows the drill of what to do if he stopped. And at 14, when he was in middle school, walking home from practice, a police officer pulled him over while he was walking. He's in his gym clothes, like very clear that he's a middle school student. But we have the conversations because it's the world that we live in. And I need to prepare him for that, because just like what you said, Dwayne, my goal is he comes home. And that's everything that we do. It's you make it home to me. We will raise all the hell. We will call all the people when you're home. But those are the conversations to have, and that we have to continue to have. And I think it's why it's so important, the things that Stephanie's talking about, and Alex and TJ, about doing your resources, your education. Like that's a trauma that's every day, right? Like every day I'm on my face praying for my son, because I know that it could be him, right? And it's the grace of God that it's not. And to know that that's an existence that someone has every single day between this hashtag and the next one is not something that we can take lightly.
Yeah, absolutely.